Hello, I'm Armando Salas. I'm the director of photography on the limited series Griselda.
I heard that you like my product. We can make a lot of money together.
Who is the one in charge?
In my early conversations with Andy, the director, we wanted to create something very unique. The color science was actually based on Polaroids that we were taking in pre-production. And so I brought those Polaroids very early on to my colorist, Ian, at Light Iron, and we landed on a very aggressive Polaroid-inspired two-tone look for the late 70s and a slightly broader color palette for the early 80s. Because the look was so aggressive, it was important for me to be viewing that on set. And so we lit to that LUT religiously. We treated it like a film negative. So by the time we got into final color, we weren't really discovering or playing with what the look will be. We'd all been living with it for a long time. It became much more about finesse and about focusing the eye and making sure the audience was brought along from scene to scene without any distractions.
Beautiful. It was like shoving a fucking coca plant up my nose.
We tested several cameras and landed on shooting the show on the Red Raptor. At the time, it was so new, we could actually only get one, and we tested the Panavision DXL2 against it, and after some color tests and some color correction, we felt really confident in the matching. The majority of the show was shot single camera, so I'd say 70% was shot with the Raptor. We were going to be shooting in very tight practical locations throughout Los Angeles. The way we were going to be shooting most of the show was on a compact remote head, and so having a small form factor for the whole thing so my AC could take it from a dolly to a crane to a jib very quickly was important because it was an ambitious schedule. And we paired the camera with Panavision Panaspeed lenses. Although I loved many of the characteristics of older vintage lenses, I was going to be so aggressive with the lighting on Griselda that I needed the performance and the consistency of the Panaspeeds, but paired with how gentle they were on skin tones, it was the right balance for the show.
Fucking drink to that.
One of the things that made this episode so exciting was there were visual elements that were a motif woven into the fabric of the episode, and those are water and fire. The episode begins with her and her son in a car wash. There's no dialogue. She's just processing and reliving the betrayals of the past and everything that's put her at this point. And it's essentially washing the slate clean as she moves forward into this new chapter of her life as she goes to war with the dealers and essentially with the Ochoas. The last shot of that sequence is the blowers moving the water off the windshield, revealing her face and the title card for the episode. This sets us on our path to war. Just as Griselda believes she's getting the upper hand, her Miami home is burned to the ground and several of her friends and confidants are killed. Dario shows up to see the house in flames and Griselda's best friend's murdered on the front lawn. Unlike the cocaine scene, we couldn't actually burn this house to the ground, so we revealed the house with Dario pulling up in his car and bringing us into the scene. We placed dozens of maxi brutes, both in condors and on the ground, some in the shot to actually create the right interaction of light with the lens, creating a halation around some of the characters at key moments, and used a ton of smoke in the front lawn, and then some real fire elements that were controllable without putting the house or any of the characters in danger. And then Andrew Sepperly, our VFX producer, was in charge of taking all those elements, the interactivity of the light, the color, and actually adding the majority of the fire to that scene. That night, a rainstorm begins that moves across several scenes, and it leads to one of my favorite shots of the episode. There's no dialogue. It's Dario telling Griselda that her friends have been killed, and it's her against the windows of her estate where she's holed up in with the rain coming down, and it's all just Sophia's performance and body language absorbing the news. As part of that rain sequence, she calls Rivy, who's hiding out in the California desert. It's the first time you see the motif on kind of back and forth, especially in terms of color, because she's in her Palm Beach home at night, rain on the windows, and he's standing at the patio of his desert motel at sunset. So the sky is essentially the color of the fire. And she is crying. The water is a metaphor for tears, right? For her sorrow that she has brought this upon herself. And he's essentially giving her the courage to fight on, to bring the fire back. That is what leads us to the moment when she decides that she's taking this all for herself and she's going to continue to fight, and the bonfire of cocaine in essentially an empty pool, to continue that back and forth between water and fire.
Pero ella no tenía hijos, y yo sí. Y estoy sintiendo que entre más lucho por ellos, más se me alejan. Y ahora estoy embarazada.
So much of the story and Griselda's journey is this balance of being a mother and a caregiver and the importance of family, and also being essentially this ruthless drug kingpin, or that's what she aspires to be at this point. So much of that duality is dealt with both in color and in framing. So we do quite a bit of two-tone color of gold and amber representing the glamour that she aspires for, and this kind of olive base that balances it out. In this episode, we get into more blues and greens that expand the palette, both to represent the shift in location as she hunkers down in this fort, essentially, this defended home in Palm Beach, but also to show the expanded ambition. As she's laying in the sofa, she has her hand over her stomach because we've just found out that she's pregnant and she's having her fourth child, and she's balancing the decisions she's making for her family against her ambition. We get our answer immediately when we see a giant mound of cocaine pallets in an empty swimming pool being doused with gasoline. This is all the drugs that she and her army of Marielitos have stolen mid-shipment from the Ochoas, and she's about to burn it. Earlier in this episode, when she's first finding the dynamics of how she's going to go about achieving her goals, the camera is much more fluid, much more roving, feeling the presence of those around her. By the time we get to this moment, the camera work becomes more centered. The world revolves around her. There's very little movement other than the opening frame that shows the mound of coke with gasoline being poured over it and the bottom of this large swimming pool. So we were on a 30-foot techno crane moving across the cocaine and revealing the scene and showing just how many people are there. And Dario, her partner, her lover, and her muscle, who's advised her to not take this route, you can see he's diminished in the background or he's off to the side. So it's a very operatic moment, and it's a rebirth by fire. She's essentially burning down the power structure that exists at that time, and she's establishing a new power in Miami. This is the moment, essentially, where she becomes the godmother.
Y no vamos a parar hasta que esos malparidos estén arrodillados, rogándonos.
Andy and I were adamant to do as much of it practically as possible, and a fire that big presents some challenges, obviously, from a safety standpoint. Everyone around the pool in proximity to the fire was a stunt player. We had a buffer, and we were shooting from a techno crane, so there was no camera personnel close to the fire. But we still wanted a rather large fire, 10, 12, 15 feet, if we could have it. And so in our conversations with art department and special effects, we came up with the ability to reproduce it as quickly as possible without having to rebuild the mound of coke. So all of those, what looks like thousands of kilos of coke, are all essentially made out of metal, so that we could pipe a gas fire in, turn it on, bring it up to the correct height, and not have to worry about fumes and gases and replacing everything that burned inside the pool. It's just a quick cleanup. The lighting challenges that creates is that as she's giving her speech, the fire hasn't kicked on yet, and when it does, there's going to be a dramatic change in exposure, and of course the flame is going to burn very bright. So we built up quite a bit of exposure for our night exterior. I think I had an ND9 in the camera, so we were using quite a bit of light out there. It looked like we were shooting night for day, actually, to the eye, so that I didn't have to rebalance once the flames kicked on. Even still, the fire burns very hot, even with that much neutral density in front of the lens. The only shot that essentially is CG fire is the overhead drone, and that was due to the downdraft of the drone shooting the final shot in the sequence. And so we had to recreate the interactive lighting for that moment. So the mound of metal cocaine bricks was removed from the pool, and we put in 4 12-light maxi brutes in a circle run through the dimmer board on a flicker pattern. And just referencing our previous shots, we just matched the color, intensity, and frequency of the flicker as best we could, and it all blends in pretty well.
You can tell the Sandman is on his way.
Cinema is a very collaborative art form, and so we're constantly refining between departments. And a sequence like this requires both the craft and artistry and also logistics. I have this idea in my mind of what the images will be, and I judge success by how close to that ideal we get. With Griselda, we got there more often than not, so I think we're all very pleased with the way it turned out.